The gratitude tithe is due. Fleet Commander Eva Rostova stood on the observation deck of the Starship Auditor. Below the planet, Kalen spun a swirl of serene blue and white. It looked peaceful from orbit, a deceptive calm for a world held in a legal stranglehold. The message blinked on the main tactical display, its polite phrasing a chilling counterpoint to its unyielding demand. Her knuckles were white where she gripped the command rail. The stakes were simple: 80 million souls, a tithe they could not pay, and a law that called this extortion justice. Rostova knew this would not be won with weapons, but in a form of public record, a star court of galactic opinion. Her reflection, in the reinforced plasteel, showed a woman wound tight, her uniform crisp, her expression a mask of control. "Status Aegis," she said, her voice low and even. The ship's integrated intelligence Aegis responded instantly, its synthesized voice a calm sea in her storm. "The Telchine flotilla maintains its station commander. Their gratitude collectors are deployed, but not yet active. They are waiting for the final default notice to expire." Rostova's jaw tightened. The Telchine, a species of crystalline beings who communicated through resonant frequencies and crushing legal precedent, had perfected the art of predatory aid. They would arrive at a world in crisis, offer assistance, and then enslave them with a debt of gratitude that compounded impossibly. They called it salvation. We called it a collar. A young ensign barely out of the academy approached her station. "Commander, the Civilian Council on Kalen is requesting a secure channel." They're panicked. Rostova nodded, not taking her eyes off the planet. "Put them through to my ready room, Lieutenant. And tell Communications Officer Jin to prepare a formal inquiry request. Cite the Interstellar Compact Article 12, Reciprocal Burdens." This was the first move, a procedural jab to force the Telchine to justify their actions before a wider audience. The game had begun. It was a game of ledgers and laws, and Rostova intended to win it by the numbers. The ready room was a Spartan space dominated by a large holotable. The faces of the Kalen Council appeared shimmering with anxiety. An elderly man, his face a roadmap of worry, spoke first. "Commander Rostova, they say we have one cycle left. They demand 1/10 of our planetary energy output for the next century." He choked on the words. "They call it payment for the atmospheric scrubbers they gifted us after the Great Fire. We had no choice but to accept their help." Rostova kept her expression neutral, a practiced calm that offered a sliver of hope. She had seen this before. It was a template, a cruel and efficient system of conquest without a single shot fired. "A debt is not a birthright. Their gift," Rostova said. Letting the word hang in the air, came with a contract. "Did you read it?" A younger woman on the council looked down, her shame palpable. "We were desperate. Our children were choking on ash. They assured us it was a standard aid pact." Rostova's heart ached for them. The Telchine preyed on desperation, their contracts woven with clauses that turned gratitude into a generational prison. "Their assurances are not legally binding," Rostova stated, her tone firm. "The text is, Aegis display the Telchine gratitude contract standard template." The air filled with glowing alien script. It was a masterpiece of malevolent legalese. The fine print was the trap. It established a gratitude index, a metric that quantified the subjective value of the aid from the provider's perspective. This index was then used to calculate the tithe, a figure that could be adjusted unilaterally by the Telchine based on their own assessment of the recipient's continued prosperity. It was a license to steal wrapped in the language of benevolence. "They are not just asking for payment," Rostova explained. "They are claiming a share of your future forever. We will challenge this." Jin's voice cut in over the comm. "Commander, the Telchine have responded to our inquiry. They've accepted." A cold smile touched Rostova's lips. Of course they had. They believed their legal framework was unassailable. Their law was a hammer. Ours would be a mirror. The civilian vignette played across a secondary screen, a quiet loop of life on Kalen. A child flew a simple kite in a park the sky above a brilliant clear blue, thanks to the very scrubbers that now threatened their future. The image was a stark reminder of what was at stake. It wasn't just about energy quotas or legal precedents. It was about that child's right to fly a kite in a sky she could call her own. Rostova watched it for a long moment, letting the image fuel her resolve. She turned to her executive officer, Commander Valerius, a man whose calm demeanor belied a sharp tactical mind. Val, I want you to start running simulations. Full economic impact analyses. What happens to Kalen if they pay, and what happens if they don't? Valerius nodded, his fingers already dancing across a data slate. Aegis is already on it, Eva. The initial projections are grim. Paying the tithe leads to a systemic collapse within 3 generations. Refusal. Well, the Telchine have a legal right to enforce collection. Enforcement. Another of their sanitized terms. It meant orbital bombardment until the energy transfer was initiated by force. It was genocide, by another name sanctioned by a treaty signed under duress. This fleet teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by collars. Rostova knew her path. She had to dismantle their legal argument piece by piece in the full view of the galactic community. We would teach them how to count the cost. The inquiry was to be held in a neutral space, a corridor of law established by comm buoy relays between the auditor and the Telchine flagship. It was a virtual courtroom with the proceedings broadcast to any interested party in the sector. The witness quorum would be vast. This was Rostova's first objective, to turn a private dispute into a public spectacle. The Telchine thrived in the shadows of complex contracts and quiet intimidation. She would drag them into the light. Jin patched in again. The Telchine emissary is ready, Commander. They call themselves Resonance of Judgment. Rostova took a deep breath. On screen, the emissary appeared, a towering, crystalline figure that seemed to absorb the light around it. It had no face, only a shifting pattern of internal luminescence that pulsed as it spoke, its voice a series of resonant chimes translated into sterile universal grammar by the comm system. Commander Rostova, your challenge is acknowledged. The gratitude covenant is sound. The debt is due. Rostova met its non-gaze without flinching. We are not challenging the existence of a debt emissary. We are challenging its nature. A debt has a principle, a fixed amount. What you have imposed is a tithe, a parasitic drain with no end. Their gratitude had no memory. The Telchine emissary shimmered, a visual representation of its displeasure. The value of survival is infinite. Our gift of a breathable atmosphere is ongoing. Therefore, the gratitude must also be ongoing. It is a simple calculus. The creature's logic was cold, inhumanly so. It failed to account for the spirit of the law, only its most literal and self-serving interpretation. The Interstellar Compact disagrees. Rostova countered, her voice sharp. Article 12 is clear. Any aid rendered must have a reciprocal and proportionate cost. Your gratitude index is a unilateral invention designed to create a permanent state of servitude. It is by definition disproportionate. She had seeded the first hook of her argument, the concept of proportionality. Aegis began to feed data streams into the public channel visible to all who watched. Charts and graphs appeared alongside Rostova's image showing the projected energy output of Kalen versus the Telchine's escalating demands. The numbers told a story of their own, a story of inevitable ruin. Valerius's voice murmured in her earpiece. Eva, they're not just watching. We have representatives from 3 other systems in this sector who've had dealings with the Telchine. They're hailing us on back channels." Rostova felt a surge of grim satisfaction. The seeds of a class action lawsuit were being sown. This was no longer just about Kalen. It was about a pattern of behavior. A ledger remembers what a predator forgets. The emissary remained unmoved. "The prosperity of the aided is the metric of our reward. If they flourish, our compensation flourishes. If they falter, it diminishes. The system is self-regulating and just." It was a beautiful lie, elegant in its construction, but it had a fatal flaw. "By that logic," Rostova said, leaning forward, "you have a vested interest in their prosperity never reaching a point where they could become truly independent. Your system incentivizes keeping them productive enough to pay, but never free enough to refuse." The accusation hung in the digital space between them. She was not just questioning their math, she was questioning their motive. She let the silence stretch, allowing the full weight of her statement to settle on the listening audience. The patterns on the emissary's crystalline form swirled faster. "Your interpretation is novel, Commander." The chimes were slightly dissonant now. "But it is irrelevant. The contract was signed. The law is on our side." Rostova's eyes narrowed. "Laws are not static things, emissary. They are living documents subject to interpretation and review, especially when they are used as instruments of oppression. We are calling for a full public inquiry into the legality of the Gratitude Covenant itself." This was the second escalation. She was putting their entire business model on trial. They built a prison of words. We would be the key. Before the inquiry could formally begin, Rostova ordered a civilian survey. Teams were dispatched via shuttle to the surface of Kalen, not as soldiers, but as census takers and storytellers. They gathered testimonials from farmers, doctors, engineers, and parents. They documented the quiet anxieties, the deferred dreams, the creeping sense of hopelessness that had settled over the population. One woman, a teacher, spoke of how her brightest students no longer aimed for the stars. They aimed for careers in energy production, the only growth sector left, a sector that existed solely to feed the Telchine tithe. "They have stolen our sky twice," she said, her voice heavy with sorrow. "First with fire, then with ink." Rostova had this testimony played on a loop in the auditor's mess hall. She wanted her crew to understand the human cost of this legal battle. They were not fighting for a principle. They were fighting for a generation of children who deserved to dream of more than just servicing a debt. Jin, her comms officer, a young woman with a fierce sense of justice, was particularly moved. "It's a soul tax, Commander," she said, her eyes flashing with anger. "That's the only word for it." Rostova agreed, and it was a tax she intended to see repealed with interest. A contract signed in ash is not binding. The day of the public inquiry arrived. A neutral adjudicator, a being of pure energy from the Cygnus Rift, was appointed to oversee the proceedings. The virtual gallery was packed with representatives from dozens of worlds. The Telchine, confident in their position, presented their case first. The resonance of judgment laid out the terms of the covenant, the desperation of the Kalen people, and the undeniable success of their atmospheric scrubbers. They presented data showing the planet's recovery, the rising population, the return of verdant life. "We brought them back from the brink," the emissary chimed. "We ask only for a share of the prosperity we created, a modest perpetual dividend on an investment in life itself." It was a compelling narrative. To the uninformed observer, the Telchine appeared as saviors, their request for payment reasonable. But Rostova was prepared. When it was her turn, she did not begin with legal arguments. She began with the stories. She played the testimony of the teacher, the farmer, the doctor. She showed the faces of the children whose futures were being mortgaged. She established the human element, the spirit of the law, before she attacked its letter. The Telchine speak of prosperity, she said, her voice ringing with conviction. But what is prosperity without freedom? What is a life lived only to service an eternal debt? They did not save a people. They purchased them. Their justice was a one-way street. Then she brought in the numbers. Valerius had worked with Aegis to create a devastatingly effective series of projections. They showed how the perpetual dividend was in fact an exponential curve. As Kalen's technology improved and its energy output grew, the Telchine's share would grow, with it always keeping the planet on the edge of subsistence. "This is not a dividend," Rostova declared, pointing to a graph that showed the tithe eclipsing the planet's entire GDP within 2 centuries. "This is a predator's calculus. It is designed to bleed its host dry, but slowly enough to keep it alive for the next feeding." She then introduced the concept of legal usury. While the term was specific to human law, its principle was universal, the charging of exorbitant interest. "We argue that the gratitude covenant is a form of legal usury masked in the language of benevolence. The principle of the loan, the cost of building and deploying the scrubbers, was paid off within the first decade of the tithe. Everything since has been pure profit, an endless tax on existence." She turned her gaze back to the emissary. "We demand a full accounting. Show us the ledger. Show us the true cost of your gift. A debt can be paid. A tithe can only be served." The Telchine emissary faltered. Its light patterns flickered erratically. A demand for a public accounting was not something they had anticipated. Their internal ledgers were proprietary, the source of their power. To reveal them would be to reveal the astronomical profit margins they made from their charity. "Our ledgers are complex," it chimed, the resonance weak. "They would not be understood by outsiders." Rostova seized on the hesitation. "Then allow us to simplify it for you. We have subpoenaed the records of the fabricators who built your atmospheric scrubbers. We have the material costs. We have the transport logs. We have the energy expenditure for deployment. We have the numbers, emissary." Aegis flooded the public channel with new data. It was a complete independent audit of the Kalen aid package. The real cost was a fraction of what the Telchine had already collected. The room was silent. The numbers were stark, irrefutable. The Telchine's carefully constructed narrative of benevolent saviors was crumbling under the weight of simple arithmetic. The adjudicator, a silent observer until now, pulsed with a bright, intense light. It directed a query at the Telchine emissary. "You will respond to this evidence. You will provide your own accounting for public review, or you will be held in contempt of this inquiry." The truth has a weight all its own. The Telchine were trapped. Refusing to provide their ledgers would be an admission of guilt. Providing them would expose their entire predatory model to the galaxy. They had been outmaneuvered not by force of arms, but by meticulous research and a steadfast demand for transparency. The emissary's light dimmed. "We require time to collate the requested data." Rostova knew a delaying tactic when she heard one. "The data should be readily available," she pressed her voice like steel. "Unless, of course, there is a reason you would prefer it not see the light of day." She was pushing them, forcing them to make a mistake in their arrogance. This was the corridor of law gambit in action. She had compelled them to speak to defend a position that was indefensible when exposed to impartial scrutiny. The quorum of witnesses was now a jury, and their verdict was already forming in the court of public opinion. The back-channel comms were lighting up. 2 more systems, former beneficiaries of Telchine aid, were now formally petitioning to join Kalen's case. What started as a single planet's plea for help was turning into a class action reckoning. The Telchine had built an empire on the fine print. Rostova was about to burn it down with a footnote. A mirror does not lie, it merely reflects. Another civilian scene flickered on a monitor. A young couple sat on a bench looking up at the night sky. The man pointed upwards, tracing the slow, stately path of the auditor. "They say she's arguing for us," he murmured, "using their own laws against them." The woman leaned her head on his shoulder. "I don't understand the law," she whispered back. "But I understand hope, and that's the first time I've felt it in a long time." The quiet dignity of the moment resonated more deeply than any legal argument. This was the core of it all. Not the victory, but the possibility of it. The right to hope for a future you could build for yourself. Rostova gave the Telchine one standard cycle to produce their ledgers. In the interim, she worked with Valerius and Aegis on the next phase of her plan, the mirror justice maneuver. It wasn't enough to win the legal argument. She had to make the Telchine pay to return the costs they had inflicted, not just on Kalin, but on every world they had ensnared. Aegis outlined the mechanics. The Telchine gratitude collectors are essentially siphons tuned to specific energy frequencies, the AI explained. With the adjudicator's authority, we can reverse the polarity. We can turn their collection network into a distribution network. We would not send a bill. We would return the payment. Valerius looked intrigued. "You're saying we can use their own hardware to send the stolen energy back?" Aegis confirmed. "Precisely. But it's more than that. We can attach a data packet to the energy stream, a public receipt. Every unit of energy returned will be accompanied by a ledger entry detailing where it came from, how much was taken, and how much interest has been accrued based on Galactic standard rates for misappropriated assets." Rostova smiled. It was beautiful. It was poetic justice written in the language of accounting. It was a public shaming on a system-wide scale. The plan was audacious, and it depended on the inquiry's outcome. But Rostova was confident. The Telchine's case was built on a foundation of lies and obfuscation. Her case was built on verifiable facts and universal principles of fairness. The law, when applied with sufficient force and clarity, could be a powerful weapon. It could also be a shield. Today, for the people of Kalin, she intended it to be both. She looked back at the planet, a jewel in the void. Her fight was for them, for the quiet moments of hope on park benches, for the freedom to look at the stars and see possibility, not a tax collector. A predator's math always ends in zero. The cycle passed. The inquiry reconvened. The Telchine emissary resonance of judgment reappeared on the screen. Its light was muted, its resonant chimes subdued. "We have reviewed our ledgers," it began. "They are proprietary. We will not be sharing them." The adjudicator pulsed a clear sign of its displeasure. "Your refusal is noted," its synthesized voice boomed. "It will be entered into the official record as a concession of the facts presented by the human delegation." The first domino had fallen. The Telchine's refusal to provide evidence was treated as an admission of its damning nature. Rostova moved in for the final stroke. Adjudicator given the defendant's refusal to provide a transparent accounting. We move for summary judgment. We ask the court to nullify the gratitude covenant with Kalin on the grounds of unconscionability and legal usury. Furthermore, we ask for a full audit of all active Telchine covenants in this sector and for the immediate suspension of all tithe collections, pending the outcome of that audit. She laid out her demands, each one a nail in the coffin of the Telchine's business model. She wasn't just freeing one client, she was dismantling the entire predatory enterprise. Justice is a form of applied mathematics. The adjudicator did not hesitate. The motion is granted. The gratitude covenant is hereby declared null and void. All tithe collections are to cease immediately. A sector-wide audit is ordered. The Telchine will cooperate fully or face permanent sanctions and forfeiture of all assets. A wave of relief washed over Rostova so profound it almost buckled her knees. They had won. They had won with logic, with evidence, and with the law. No shots had been fired. No lives had been lost. It was a clean victory, a victory of principle. But it wasn't over yet. Now came the reckoning. Now came the mirror. She turned to Jin. Open a channel to the fleet. All ships. I want them to witness this. She then addressed the adjudicator. With your permission, adjudicator, we would like to begin the process of restitution. The Telchine have misplaced a significant amount of Kalen's energy. We would like to help them return it. The adjudicator gave a slow, deliberate pulse of affirmative light. The stage was set. Aegis, the time is now. Execute the Mirror Ledger Protocol. Valeria stood beside her, a rare, wide grin spreading across his face. This is going to be a sight to see, he said. A receipt is a weapon that cuts both ways. On the main view screen, the image shifted from the courtroom to the Telchine flotilla. Their gratitude collectors, elegant crystalline lattices hung in the void, silent and inert. Then one by one they began to glow. But it was not their usual cold blue light. It was a warm golden hue, the color of Kalen's sun. Aegis's voice filled the bridge, calm and precise. Reversing polarity. Accessing Telchine energy reserves. Cross-referencing stolen assets with our audit data. The first transfer is beginning. A brilliant beam of pure energy lanced out from the lead Telchine ship, not towards Kalen, but away from it towards the first of the other worlds they had exploited. Attached to the beam, visible on every sensor in the system, was the data packet. It scrolled in the void, a cosmic receipt for all to see. Restitution. From the Telchine Collective. To Planet Xylar. Principal 1.2 plus 10 were 22 joules. Interest accrued 4.7 Han turned 21 joules. Paid in full. The transfer was instantaneous, a flash of light and data. Then another beam to another world. And another. The Telchine flotilla, their instruments of extortion, had been turned into unwilling instruments of justice. They were being forced to repay their debts with their own technology in the most public way imaginable. They thought they owned the sky. We just rented it back to them. The chimes from the Telchine emissary were frantic, a discordant shriek of impotent rage. This is theft. You are seizing our assets. Rostova's voice was ice. We are not seizing anything, emissary. We are returning stolen property. Your own legal framework is built on the principle of collection. We are simply collecting, with interest, and with a publicly verifiable ledger, something you seemed unwilling to provide. The irony was delicious. She was using their own philosophy against them, mirroring their actions back at them with perfect mathematical precision. The process continued for hours. Beam after beam of golden energy crisscrossed the sector, each one a line item in a vast public accounting. The Telchine were hemorrhaging energy and, more importantly, credibility. Their reputation as benevolent saviors was being incinerated in real time, replaced by the stark, undeniable truth of their predation. On Kalen, the news was met with stunned disbelief, which quickly gave way to euphoric celebration. The sky, which had been a symbol of their bondage, now lit up with the fireworks of their liberation. They were free, truly free. A bill collector's nightmare is a public audit. The final beam was directed at Kalen itself. It was the largest transfer by far, the sum total of all the energy they had paid over the decades, plus punitive interest. The planet's power grid surged, chain storage facilities filled to capacity, and the excess was shunted into a planetary shield, a defiant display of their newfound sovereignty. The public ledger blinked its final entry for the planet. Paid in full. Privileges rescinded. The Telchines' legal right to operate in this sector was revoked. Their method was outlawed. The precedent was locked. Rostova watched the last of the golden light fade. The Telchine flotilla, now significantly dimmer, began to retreat, their crystalline forms exuding a palpable sense of defeat. She had faced them down without firing a single missile, without losing a single soul. She had won by holding up a mirror and forcing them to look at their own reflection, a reflection distorted by greed and a callous disregard for the spirit of the law. It was a victory that would be studied in academies for years to come, a textbook case of asymmetric legal warfare. Their greatest weapon was the fine print. Ours was the footnote. There was a cost, of course. The legal battle had consumed enormous resources. The auditor had spent months preparing the case time it could have been using to patrol other troubled sectors. The political capital Rostova had expended was immense. She had made powerful enemies today, not just among the Telchine, but among those who profited from their predatory model. It was a victory, but a hard-won one, a reminder that even bloodless conflicts leave their scars. Her career might even suffer for it. She had bent the rules, pushed the boundaries of legal precedent, and embarrassed a powerful, well-connected species. There would be consequences. Aegis's voice was a calm presence on the quiet bridge. Commander Kalin is broadcasting on all frequencies. It is a message of thanks. They are naming a new constellation in their sky after you. Rostova felt a lump form in her throat. She looked at the faces of her crew, at Jin's fierce pride, at Valerius's satisfied smile. They had done more than win a legal case. They had given 80 million people their future back. They had upheld the highest ideals of the fleet, to protect, to serve, and to ensure that justice was not just a word, but a verifiable entry on a public ledger. Sometimes the only way to win is to change the rules of the game. A new alert blinked on her console. It was a priority message from Fleet Command. Her superiors. She steeled herself for the inevitable reprimand, the political fallout from her audacious actions. She opened the message. It was short, direct, and to the point. Well done, Commander. Your precedent has been ratified. The Rostova Doctrine is now fleet-wide policy. Proceed to the next system on your list. The gratitude tithe is due. She read it twice, a slow smile spreading across her face. They weren't punishing her. They were promoting her method. They were turning her victory into a new standard. She looked out at the stars, at the infinite black, dotted with the promise of new worlds, new challenges. The fight was far from over. The Telchine were just one species among many who used the law as a weapon. But now they had a counter, a new way of fighting back, a way that didn't require fleets of warships but teams of auditors, a way that didn't end in genocide but in restitution, a way that turned predators into unwilling philanthropists. Her gaze fell upon her reflection in the plasteel one last time. The woman staring back was no longer just a commander. She was a weaponized accountant, and she had a galaxy full of books to balance. The law is not a shield, it is a sword. On a quiet street on Kalin, a family gathered on their balcony, their faces upturned. The celebration was in full swing, a planet-wide festival of light and sound. The father lifted his young daughter onto his shoulders so she could see better. "Look," he said, his voice thick with emotion, pointing to the sky where the auditor still held its vigil. "That is the ship that gave us back our stars." The little girl who had only ever known a sky that belonged to someone else looked up in wonder. For the first time she saw not a ceiling, but a horizon. an invitation, a future that was hers to claim. Her laughter, pure and unrestrained, was the only victory celebration Rostova needed to hear. The bridge of the auditor was quiet now, the adrenaline of the confrontation giving way to a profound sense of satisfaction. Valerius came to stand beside her at the command rail. "That was a hell of a risk, Ava," he said softly, "banking everything on a legal argument." Rostova nodded, her eyes still on the recovering planet below. "The biggest risks are the only ones worth taking, Val. We could have leveled their ships. It would have been easier, faster, but it would have been their kind of justice, an eye for an eye. We offered them something better, a chance to see themselves as others see them. The universe does not care about justice, but it does respect a balanced budget." Jin approached her console, blinking with incoming data. "Commander, the other systems, the ones who joined our petition. They're hailing us. They're calling it the Great Unburdening." Rostova allowed herself a small, genuine smile. A name. It already had a name. That's how she knew it would stick. That's how she knew this was more than just a single victory. It was the beginning of a movement, a shift in the galactic balance of power, away from those who wrote the predatory contracts and toward those who were forced to sign them. The little people, the desperate, the ones who had no voice. Today they had been heard. Aegis's voice cut through the quiet hum of the bridge. "Commander, long-range sensors are picking up a Telchine vessel breaking from their main flotilla. It is on an intercept course." Rostova's posture stiffened. Hostile intent. Valerius moved to the tactical station, his hand hovering over the defense grid controls. "Negative, Commander," Aegis replied after a moment's analysis. "The vessel is broadcasting a standard diplomatic signal. It is hailing us. They have a message from the resonance of judgment." Rostova raised an eyebrow. An olive branch or a new kind of trap? "Put it on screen, Aegis. Let's see what they have to say now that the bill has come due." Sometimes the most expensive thing you can own is a debt. The image of the resonance of judgment shimmered on the main screen. The light patterns within its crystalline form were now slow, deliberate, almost hypnotic. The discordant chimes of its anger were gone, replaced by a pure, analytical tone. "Commander Rostova," it began, the translation software rendering its harmonics into crisp, uninflected speech. "Your victory was comprehensive. Your application of legal leverage was innovative. You have demonstrated a superior understanding of systemic calculus." Rostova waited, her expression unreadable. This was not the preamble to a surrender. It was a performance review. Valerius shifted his weight beside her, a flicker of unease in his eyes. "What is this?" he muttered. The emissary seemed to hear him, its light pulsing in his direction. "We do not mourn the loss of Kalen's tithe. It was a single asset among many. We mourn the inefficiency. You have identified a flaw in our methodology, a vulnerability to public sentiment we had not adequately weighted." The creature paused, a calculated beat for dramatic effect. "Therefore, we wish to retain your services. We will pay you to apply the Rostova doctrine on our behalf against our competitors. Name your price." Their surrender was a job offer. The silence on the bridge was absolute, broken only by the soft thrum of the life support systems. Jin's jaw was literally agape. Valerius stared at the screen as if the emissary had sprouted limbs and started juggling. Rostova, however, did not react. She had anticipated a new threat, a new angle of attack. She had simply underestimated its audacity. The Telchine were not admitting moral defeat. They were acknowledging a superior business strategy and attempting a hostile takeover of its creator. "You want to hire me?" Rostova stated, her voice flat, "to be your more efficient predator." "Precisely," the emissary chimed, its light brightening with something akin to enthusiasm. Your methods are clean, publicly defensible, and devastatingly effective. You have demonstrated an ability to weaponize accountability. Such a talent should not be wasted on sentimental crusades. It should be directed toward maximum profitability. The sheer naked honesty of the offer was its most insidious feature. The Telchine did not see themselves as evil. They saw themselves as rational actors in a galactic economy, and they had just discovered a powerful new tool. They wanted to add it to their arsenal. A predator does not apologize. It adapts. My talent, Rostova said, her voice dangerously quiet, is not for sale. My methods are not a product to be licensed. They are a principle to be defended. The principle that a contract is a promise, not a cage. That a debt has an end. That justice cannot be calculated on a balance sheet. She took a step closer to the screen, her eyes boring into the crystalline heart of the alien. We are not for hire. We are not for sale. We are the consequence. We are the audit. We are the line that you do not cross. She motioned to Jin. Cut the channel. The screen went black. The bridge was still silent. Jin finally found her voice. Commander, did they just... Valerius finished the thought for her. They just tried to recruit us to be their legal assassins. The sheer nerve of it. Rostova turned away from the blank screen, her mind already racing ahead. This wasn't over. The Telchine's offer was not a sign of respect. It was a new kind of threat. When they couldn't buy her, they would try to break her. They would work to discredit her, to dismantle the very doctrine that now bore her name. They could not buy the method, so they would burn the architect. Her first order was to Aegis. Aegis run a full diagnostic on all ship systems. Check for any unauthorized intrusions, any backdoors left during the data exchange of the inquiry. I want a complete security sweep. Her second order was to Valerius. I want you to start a deep dive into the Telchine's corporate structure, not their public face. I want to know who backs them, who holds their markers. A species this confident, this arrogant, doesn't operate in a vacuum. They have partners, and those partners are the ones we need to worry about now. The game had changed. The courtroom was closed. A new shadowy conflict had begun. A civilian vignette appeared on a side monitor, a news feed from a distant system in the Perseus arm. A small reptilian species, the Gornak, had been trapped in a similar gratitude covenant with a different corporate entity. Inspired by the news from Kalen, their leaders had just filed a formal challenge citing the Rostova doctrine as precedent. The news anchor, a being of living gas contained in a shimmering suit, reported on it with cautious optimism. Rostova watched the Gornak leader, his scales dull with age and worry, speak of a new hope for the indebted. Her victory was already spreading, but so too was the risk. If she fell, she would take all these fledgling hopes down with her. A single precedent is a rebellion waiting to happen. Days turned into weeks. The auditor patrolled the sector, a silent guardian enforcing the new legal reality. The sector-wide audit of the Telchine was proceeding, albeit slowly. The crystalline beings were masters of bureaucratic resistance, bogging the process down in procedural minutiae. But they were complying. The tithes had stopped. It was a quiet, simmering cold war of lawyers and accountants. Then the first counterattack came, not as a direct assault, but as a whisper campaign. A series of articles began to appear on the Galactic news nets penned by anonymous legal scholars. They questioned the validity of the Kalen inquiry. They painted Rostova as a reckless crusader, a human who had imposed her species' subjective morality on a transaction that was perfectly valid under galactic law. They hinted at procedural errors, at data that was conveniently overlooked. It was a subtle, sophisticated campaign of character assassination designed to erode public trust in the Rostova doctrine. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts. Jin tracked the origin of the articles. They all traced back to a single hyper-secure server hidden in the financial nebula of the Cygnus X1 system. They did not attack the ruling. They attacked the ruler. The server is owned by a shell corporation, Jin reported, her brow furrowed in concentration. Which is owned by another and another. It's a maze. But Aegis found something. The AI's voice took over. The financial backing for these corporations and for the news outlets publishing the articles originates from a single source, the VEC Consortium. Valerius swore under his breath. The VEC were not a species. They were a guild, a shadowy collective of financiers and data brokers who were rumored to have a hand in every major economic enterprise in the galaxy. They never took sides publicly. They simply owned the table the game was played on. The Telchine were not the masters of their own house. They were clients. The VEC Consortium was the true power, the silent partner who underwrote their predatory ventures. And Rostova hadn't just cost their client a revenue stream. She had established a legal precedent that threatened the VEC's entire business model, which was built on the exploitation of impenetrable contracts and information asymmetry. She had not just stepped on a predator's toes. She had kicked over the anthill of the Galactic 1%. A predator is dangerous, but a predator's banker is lethal. This was the escalation she had been waiting for. The VEC were a far more dangerous adversary than the Telchine. They didn't operate in the open. They didn't have flagships or emissaries. Their weapons were capital flight market manipulation and blackmail. They could ruin worlds without ever leaving their fortified data havens. And now they had turned their formidable resources on her. Rostova knew she had to force them into the light, just as she had with the Telchine. But how do you serve a subpoena on a shadow? She gathered her team in the ready room. The VEC won't face us in a public inquiry, she said, pacing before the holotable. They value their anonymity too much. They will try to destroy us from the shadows. So we have to give them a reason to come out. We need to find leverage. Aegis projected a complex web of corporate affiliations, a galaxy-spanning network of influence that all led back to the VEC. Their strength is their network, the AI stated. It is also their weakness. A network has nodes that can be severed. The hunt was on. They needed to find a VEC operation they could legally challenge, a case so egregious it would force the consortium to either defend it publicly or cut it loose. To fight a shadow, you must first give it a body. While the auditor's crew dug into the VEC's finances, another vignette played out on a news feed. On the Gornak homeworld, their challenge had been met with overwhelming legal force. The corporation, they were indebted to a subsidiary of a company quietly owned by the VEC, had buried them in counter-motions and procedural challenges. The Gornak leader, who had spoken with such hope just weeks before, now looked defeated. Their planet's legal system was grinding to a halt, their economy in freefall, as the corporation called in every marker it held. The Rostova Doctrine. It seemed required a Rostova to make it work. It required a champion with the resources to fight back. The scene hardened Rostova's resolve. Her fight was no longer just about defending her own reputation. It was about proving that her doctrine was a viable weapon for anyone, not just for a well-equipped human starship. She had to create a playbook that the Gornak and others like them could follow. She had to democratize her brand of justice. It was a monumental task, and the VEC were doing everything in their power to make sure she failed. Their quiet war of attrition was escalating. The auditor's supply lines were being mysteriously delayed. Her crew's personal financial records were being hacked. It was a campaign of 1,000 annoyances designed to distract and demoralize. They could not break the ship, so they tried to break the crew. Aegis found the target. It was a small, almost forgotten case on a fringe world called Sarathos. A native species of gentle insectoid artisans had signed away the mineral rights to their entire moon in exchange for medical technology to fight a plague. The contract was on its face a standard trade agreement, but Aegis had flagged a buried clause, a single line of code in the digital contract that gave the purchasing corporation, VEC subsidiary Lunar Ventures, complete control over Sarathos's orbital space. They had used this control to set up a toll booth charging exorbitant fees for any ship entering or leaving the system. They had isolated the planet, turning it into a private fiefdom. "It's perfect," Valeria said, studying the data. They overreached. Control of orbital space is governed by Galactic treaty. It can't be traded away in a private contract. It's a clear violation of interstellar law. Rostova agreed. This was the leverage they needed. It was a clear-cut case, a public interest issue, and the contract had the VEC's digital fingerprints all over it. Jin, prepare a formal complaint to the Galactic Commerce Authority. Name Lunar Ventures as the defendant. And Aegis. She set a grim smile on her face. I want you to leak the entire unredacted contract to every news outlet from here to the core. Let's see how the VEC like the taste of radical transparency. They built their empire on secrets. We would tear it down with truth. The release of the Sarathos contract was a bombshell. The story of a small artistic species being cut off from the galaxy by a legal loophole was exactly the kind of narrative that captured the public imagination. The news nets, even the ones previously critical of Rostova, ran with it. The term orbital piracy began to trend. The Galactic Commerce Authority, a notoriously slow and bureaucratic body, was forced by public pressure to schedule an immediate hearing. And they demanded that a representative of Lunar Ventures' parent corporation be present. They had given the shadow a body. The VEC were being forced to step out of the darkness and into the courtroom. Rostova knew they would not come quietly. They would come prepared. They would come with the best lawyers money could buy. And they would come for her. She was the one who had dragged them into the light, and they would make her pay for it. The hearing was to be held at a neutral orbital station, a gleaming spire of law and commerce known as the Spire. The auditor set a course. The crew was on edge. They were no longer just enforcing a verdict. They were the plaintiffs in a case against the most powerful and ruthless financial entity in the galaxy. The stakes had been raised to their absolute limit. When you challenge a king, you must be prepared to become one. Before their arrival at the Spire, Rostova received a personal message. It was from the Gornak leader. The news of the Sarathos case had reached them. The public outcry had forced their own corporate overlords to ease the legal pressure, fearing similar exposure. You have given us breathing room, Commander, the old Gornak said, his voice filled with a renewed fragile hope. You have shown us that the light is a weapon. We are studying your methods. We are learning to fight. Rostova felt the weight of that trust settle on her shoulders. She was no longer just a commander. She was a teacher, and she could not afford to fail her students. The Spire was an awe-inspiring sight, a city in the stars dedicated to the principle of galactic trade. But Rostova knew that for every law written to ensure fairness, there was a loophole written to exploit it. The VEC had been masters of that game for centuries. As the auditor docked, a formal notification appeared on her console. It was a legal filing from the VEC consortium. It was a countersuit. They were accusing her of corporate espionage, of illegally accessing their proprietary data to build her case against Lunar Ventures. And they claimed to have evidence, a sworn affidavit, from a member of her own crew. Their first attack was not a defense, but an accusation. The name on the affidavit was Lieutenant Kalin, a junior engineering officer, a quiet, competent young man who had served on the auditor for 3 years. Rostova felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. It was a lie, of course, a fabrication, but it was a brilliant one. It shifted the entire focus of the hearing. It was no longer about the Vex crimes. It was about hers. They were turning her own doctrine back on her, putting her on trial in the court of public opinion. And they had created a schism in her own command, a poison of doubt and suspicion that could tear her crew apart. Valerius was livid. They bought him or threatened him. Kalin would never. Rostova held up a hand, cutting him off. Anger won't help us, Val. They've made their move. Now we make ours. She called for a full crew assembly in the main hangar bay. She stood before them, the countersuit displayed on the screen behind her. The VEC Consortium believes they have found our weakness, she said, her voice steady, resonant. They believe it is one of our own. They believe that by planting the seed of betrayal, they can make us turn on each other. They are wrong. A crew's true strength is not in its weapons, but in its trust. She looked out at the faces of her crewmen and women, of a dozen different species, all united by a common purpose. The Vec's greatest weapon is the lie. Our greatest weapon is the truth. Therefore, we will meet their accusation with the one thing they cannot manipulate and cannot defeat: complete, unredacted transparency. This was the ultimate risk, the final escalation. Aegis effective immediately, you will open the ship's logs, all of them. Every communication, every data transfer, every diagnostic from the moment we entered this sector. We will show the entire galaxy that we have nothing to hide. We will turn their mirror back on them, and we will let the public be the judge. It was an unprecedented move. A military vessel's logs were sacrosanct. Opening them to public scrutiny was a career-ending court-martial-able offense under normal circumstances. But these were not normal circumstances. This was a war of information, and the only way to win was to control the narrative. By opening her books, she was seizing that control, demonstrating a level of confidence so absolute it bordered on arrogance. She was daring the Vec to do the same, and she knew they never could. Their entire empire was built on secrets that would not survive the light of day. The ultimate defense is to have nothing to hide. The hearing chambers was a vast amphitheater packed with observers. In the center sat the three arbiters of the Galactic Commerce Authority. On one side, Rostova and her team. On the other, a Vec representative, a smooth reptilian being named Xylar, whose species was known for its silver tongue and complete lack of scruples. He oozed a confident charm that set Rostova's teeth on edge. The proceedings began, and as expected, Xylar immediately moved to have the Sarathos case dismissed, citing the criminal actions of Commander Rostova in obtaining her evidence. She speaks of transparency, Xylar said, his voice dripping with mock sincerity, but she used a mole, a traitor in her own ranks, to steal our private data. How can we trust any evidence she presents? He then played the sworn testimony of Lieutenant Kalin, a pre-recorded message where the young officer woodenly confessed to hacking the Vex systems on Rostova's orders. It was convincing. The arbiters murmured amongst themselves. The public feed showed a wave of negative sentiment. The Vex trap was working. A lie travels halfway around the galaxy, while the truth is putting on its boots. When it was her turn to speak, Rostova did not address the accusation directly. Instead, she looked at the chief arbiter. Honored arbiters, the Vec Consortium has accused me of a crime. To prove my innocence, I have taken the extraordinary step of making my vessel's complete logs public. Every single data point is now available for independent review on the public net. I invite the Vec to do the same. Let them show us their logs for the same period. Let them prove that they have nothing to hide. Xylar's smile tightened. He had not anticipated this. Our logs contain proprietary trade secrets. Such a request is absurd. Is it? Rostova countered, her voice ringing through the chamber. Or is it simply that your trade secrets are what we would call criminal conspiracies? You have made an accusation. The burden of proof is on you. You have offered the testimony of one man. I have offered the testimony of an entire starship's unalterable data stream. I ask the court and the public, which evidence carries more weight? She had turned the tables. She had made the Vex secrecy the central issue. Their refusal to open their own logs was now more damning than any accusation they could level at her. Sometimes the loudest statement is an unanswered question. While the legal battle raged, Aegis was engaged in a different kind of fight. The AI was sifting through the petabytes of data from its own logs, cross-referencing them with the Vex accusation. Commander, its voice spoke softly in her earpiece. I have found a discrepancy. The data packet Lieutenant Kalen allegedly stole from the Vex servers has a unique chronoton signature. According to our logs, that exact signature does not appear anywhere in our systems until the moment the Vex countersuit was filed. The stolen data was never on our ship. It was planted in the evidence they presented. It was the smoking gun. The Vex had not just suborned a witness. They had fabricated the evidence from whole cloth. They had created a digital ghost and tried to pretend they had caught it. But Aegis had done more. It had traced the origin of the fabricated data packet. The methods used to create the packet's false signature are highly sophisticated, the AI continued. There are only a handful of entities with the capability, and one of them is the chief data security firm for the Galactic Commerce Authority itself. The corruption went deeper than she could have ever imagined. The court itself was compromised. The rot was not in the branches, it was in the roots. Rostova knew she could not simply present this information. The Vex would deny it, and their allies within the GCA would bury it. She had to do something more dramatic. She had to show, not tell. Aegis, she said, her voice a low whisper. Can you replicate the process? Can you create a new data packet with the same false signature? Trivially, Commander. A plan began to form in Rostova's mind, a high-stakes gamble that would either win her the case or see her imprisoned for contempt of court. It was time for the final mirror. She rose to address the arbiters again. Honored arbiters, the Vex have presented you with digital evidence. They claim it proves my guilt. I would like to demonstrate to the court just how easily such evidence can be created. Before anyone could stop her, she gave the silent command to Aegis. On the main screen behind the arbiters, a new data file appeared. It had the official seal of the Vex Consortium. It was titled Project Chimera, and it was a detailed plan to destabilize the GCA's financial systems. It was a complete fabrication created by Aegis in seconds, but it looked utterly real. The best way to expose a forgery is to become a better forger. Xyler leaped to his feet, his reptilian face pale. This is an outrage, a forgery. She is fabricating evidence in open court. Rostova turned to him, her expression serene. Am I Xylar, or am I simply using your own methods? How can you prove that this document is any more or less real than the one you have used to accuse me? My AI created this in less than a minute. Tell me, how long did it take your forgers to create the evidence against me? She then looked back at the arbiters whose faces were now masks of shock and dawning comprehension. The Vex have not brought a case to this court. They have brought a virus, a lie designed to infect the very systems of justice. And I have just shown you the antidote. The chamber erupted. The Vex case was in shambles, their methods exposed in the most dramatic and humiliating way possible. But Rostova wasn't finished. The forgery of evidence before this body is the highest of crimes, she declared, her voice resonating with righteous fury. And it was accomplished using security protocols developed by this authority's own contractors. We are no longer here to discuss orbital piracy on Sarathos. We are here to discuss the systemic corruption that has allowed predators like the Vec to flourish for far too long. I demand a full independent inquiry into the Vec Consortium and all of its affiliates, including those within this very institution. The law had been infected. She was the cure. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for the Vec. Faced with a full-blown institutional scandal, the GCA had no choice but to turn on them to save itself. Xylar was detained. Warrants were issued. Assets were frozen. The public ledger, the one that had broadcast Kalen's liberation, now lit up with the names of Vec subsidiaries, their charters being revoked one by one. The Rostova Doctrine had claimed its biggest victim yet. Not by auditing a contract, but by auditing the system itself. The cost was as always tangible. Lieutenant Kalen, broken by the Vec's threats against his family, was placed on indefinite medical leave, his career over. The auditor's open logs had exposed fleet operational details that, while clearing Rostova's name, had sent shudders through the Admiralty. Her relationship with command was now one of strained respect, not trust. She was a hero, but a dangerously unpredictable one. She had won, but she was more isolated than ever. The public ledger entry blinked its final devastating confirmation: Vec Consortium. Charter revoked, assets forfeited, dissolved. The mirror arrays of the Spire, which had reflected the proceedings across the galaxy, slowly dimmed their light, cooling in the silent void. It was not a war of ships, but of systems. The law is not a static code. It is the operating system of civilization, and it is full of exploits and backdoors. We did not set out to be heroes. We were just the debugging team, the patch that the system desperately needed. We held up a mirror not to our enemies, but to the very idea of justice itself. And we forced it to see its own flaws, its own corruption. The books are balanced for now, but the ledger is long, and there are always more entries to be made, more accounts to be settled. The work is never truly done. The audit is eternal,